The first slap cracked through the courtroom louder than the gavel. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The marble floors gleamed beneath the harsh fluorescent lights, and the air carried that heavy hush of a room meant for solemn justice. But justice was nowhere to be found. Instead, the sound of flesh striking flesh hung in the silence, like an insult carved into stone. Officer Daniels leaned back, his palm still tingling from the blow. His smirk widened as his voice cut across the stunned whispers. "Watch yourself, woman," he said coldly. "You don't belong here." His partner, Officer Harris, chuckled under his breath. "Should have known she'd try to slip in where she's not wanted." "They always do," laughter rose from the benches. Not from everyone, but from enough. A few jurors shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting between each other, unsure whether to laugh or look away. But the tone had been set. This woman was not one of them. Not part of their world of polished shoes, tailored suits, and cold authority. Her cheek still stung, the heat of humiliation crawling across her skin. She didn't speak. She didn't even flinch. Slowly she bent to gather the folder that had been knocked from her hands. The papers scattered like fallen leaves across the floor. "Pathetic," Harris muttered. He stepped forward deliberately, pressing the heel of his boot onto the papers. The sharp crunch echoed as he ground her work into the marble. The humiliation deepened. It wasn't just the slap now, it was the boot, the laughter, the whispers that swirled like smoke around her. "Come on," Daniels sneered. "Move along. This place is for real people, not strays." A ripple of cruel laughter followed, bouncing against the polished walls. The woman stood there, her breathing steady. To anyone watching, she looked beaten, small, powerless, a figure who didn't dare challenge the authority looming over her. But behind her silence, something burned. A fire that humiliation could not extinguish. Her eyes flickered toward the judge's bench, still empty. She lingered there, gaze fixed, as if she already knew where she truly belonged. But no one else could see it. To them she was invisible. A man in the audience whispered loudly enough for the room to hear. "She probably wandered in off the street." "Should throw her out, or lock her up," another voice chimed, dripping with contempt. The crowd laughed again. Every sound pressed against her chest, tightening like a vice. Still, she stayed quiet. Her silence was not weakness. It was patience, stretched thin but unbroken. Daniels leaned closer, his words sharp with venom. "I said move." Her lips parted, not to argue, but to breathe. A single deep inhale steadied her. She gathered the last of her papers from under his boot, her fingers brushing the leather, and stood tall. Not once did she meet his eyes. Not yet. The bailiff entered then, breaking the moment. His voice boomed across the room. "All rise for the honorable judge." He looked down at the docket, reading the name with practiced authority. "Judge Amara Johnson." The words landed like thunder. The woman did not move, not immediately. She let the silence stretch, let the officer's smirks linger a few seconds longer. Confusion rippled through the courtroom. Heads turned, whispers rose again, but this time they carried a different edge. Uncertainty. Daniels frowned. "Judge Johnson? Where is she?" The woman finally lifted her head. Her eyes locked on the bench. Her steps echoed as she moved forward, slow and deliberate, carrying the same papers they had tried to grind into the floor. Gasps spread as realization dawned. She didn't stop at the front row. She didn't hesitate at the steps. She climbed them, each footfall landing like a drumbeat of revelation. The clerk approached, draping the black robes across her shoulders. Her hands brushed the smooth fabric, and for the first time that morning her lips curved into the faintest, sharpest smile. The gavel gleamed in its place, waiting for her. Daniel's smirk vanished. Harris took half a step back, his face paling. No, this has to be some kind of mistake," he stammered. She turned then, finally meeting their eyes. Her voice carried across the chamber, steady as iron, no mistake. "I am Judge Johnson." The room fell silent. The whispers died. The laughter evaporated, leaving only the sound of shallow breathing, the weight of disbelief. For the first time, the officers looked small. Their badges, their uniforms, their arrogance, none of it shielded them from the truth revealed in that moment. The same woman they had slapped, mocked and trampled now, towered above them from the bench of power, and with a single measured tap of the gavel, she began. "This court," she said, her eyes never leaving theirs, "is now in session." The silence that followed was heavier than chains. The shift in power was complete, and though no verdict had yet been spoken, everyone in that room already knew. The ones who believed themselves untouchable were about to stand trial. Not just in law, but in dignity. The courtroom had changed. The balance had broken. And the reckoning was only beginning. The courtroom silence lingered like a storm cloud. But before the gavel could strike again, before the officers could grasp the weight of their mistake, the story of Judge Amara Johnson reached further back, to a time when she was not draped in robes or seated on a bench of power. Once, she was simply Amara. Her earliest memories were painted with the sounds of struggle, the rattle of the bus her mother cleaned every night, the tired sighs of her father returning from double shifts at the factory. The Johnson household carried more love than money, but love didn't pay rent, and it didn't shield them from the stares of neighbors who measured worth in possessions. Amara learned quickly what it meant to be invisible. Teachers skipped her raised hand, assuming she wouldn't know the answer. Store clerks followed her mother through aisles, whispering suspicions with every step. Even as a child, she felt the sharpness of judgment pressed against her skin like thorns. But invisibility had its advantages. She listened when others thought she wasn't there. She watched. She remembered. At 7, she overheard a teacher say, "Children like her don't go far. They end up where their parents are." That night, she wrote a single line in her notebook. "I will prove them wrong." School became her battleground. She devoured books that were never assigned, stayed awake under the dim light of her desk lamp long after the neighborhood fell silent. But brilliance did not shield her from cruelty. One afternoon in middle school, a group of boys cornered her at her locker. "You think you're smart, huh?" One sneered. "Nobody cares about some poor black girl trying to act better than us." They shoved her books onto the floor, papers scattering like fallen feathers. Laughter echoed down the hallway. Amara bent down, gathering each page, her fingers trembling but her face steady. She didn't cry, not there, not in front of them. But that night she pressed her notebook open again. "One day they'll see me differently." Teachers doubted her dreams too. When she told her guidance counselor she wanted to study law, the woman chuckled softly, shaking her head. "Law school is expensive. You should be realistic, Amara. Aim for something simpler." The words stung, but they became fuel. She earned scholarships, small at first, then larger as her grades and determination outshined doubt. But every step forward demanded sacrifice. While her classmates bought new laptops, she worked evenings scrubbing tables in a diner, her textbooks stacked behind the counter. Customers barely noticed her except to wave her over. Sometimes they whispered cruel things assuming she couldn't hear. "Smart girl, huh? Bet she doesn't last a semester," but she lasted. More than that, she excelled. Still, the road was littered with barriers. Professors mispronounced her name, calling her Anna or Mara, as though trimming her identity to fit their comfort. Group projects excluded her. Invitations never reached her dorm door. One night, as she sat alone in the library, exhaustion pulling at her eyes, she whispered aloud, "Why am I doing this? Why keep fighting?" The answer rose from within, because justice needed a voice that understood silence. Law school was brutal. Students sharpened themselves into weapons, competing not just for grades, but for survival in a world where one mistake could shatter a career before it began. Amara entered that crucible with nothing but determination. She was surrounded by students whose families owned firms, whose parents were judges, who carried privilege like armor. She had no armor, only grit. The first time she spoke in class, a boy smirked and whispered, "Quota seat." The professor didn't correct him, but Amara didn't falter. She answered every question, her voice clear, her arguments sharp. Each response chipped away at the wall of doubt surrounding her. Yet even victories came with scars. Internships slipped through her fingers, offered instead to students with powerful connections. She was told, "You're impressive, but not the right fit." At night, she returned to her tiny apartment, exhaustion pressing her into the mattress. Bills stacked on her kitchen counter, but she kept studying, kept writing, kept fighting. One evening, after another rejection letter, she called her mother. Her voice cracked. "Maybe they're right, Mama. Maybe this isn't meant for me." Her mother's voice, steady and warm, flowed through the receiver. "No, baby. They see your power, and it scares them. That's why they try to stop you. But you don't stop. You rise." Amara held those words like a lifeline. Her first real day inside a courtroom wasn't as a lawyer. It was as an observer, an intern trailing behind a defense attorney. The wood-paneled walls, the echo of footsteps, the solemn weight of the bench, it struck her like destiny. But destiny had claws. During a recess, she overheard two attorneys whispering, "Who's the intern?" "Johnson. From the state program. Figures. They'll take anyone these days." "Won't last." The words cut deep, but Amara lifted her chin higher. That day, she promised herself that one day, she wouldn't just sit in a courtroom, she would command it. Years passed. Step by step, she shattered barriers. She became an attorney, then a respected litigator. Each case was a war, each victory a defiance. But the battles left her scarred. She lost friends to burnout. She lost nights of sleep to preparation. She lost parts of herself to the constant weight of proving her worth. Still, she rose. When her nomination for judge came, the whispers returned. "She's too young. She's too inexperienced. She's not one of us." But the appointment came through. On the day she first donned the robe, she stood before the mirror, hands trembling, and whispered, "They will see me now." And now she stood in that same robe, in the same courtroom where humiliation had just been weaponized against her. The echoes of her past clashed with the present moment. The slap on her cheek wasn't just today's insult. It was every insult she had endured since childhood. Every dismissal, every whisper, every shove in the hallway, every rejection letter. But she was no longer the girl gathering papers from the floor. She was no longer the student excluded, the intern dismissed, the lawyer underestimated. She was Judge Amara Johnson. Her gaze swept across the courtroom, past the crowd, past the officers who had mocked her. She saw fear in their eyes now, the same fear she had carried all her life, but inverted, reflected back at them. The gavel rested in her hand, and for the first time, the weight felt right. Her voice rang out. "Steady as stone, this court is not a place for humiliation. It is a place for justice. And today, justice begins here." The officers stiffened, their confidence unraveling. The silence deepened, like the pause before a storm. The reckoning was coming. The gavel rested in her hand like a thunderbolt waiting to fall. For a moment, the courtroom held its breath. Everyone was frozen, officers, onlookers, lawyers, even the bailiff, locked in the silence that followed her declaration, "I am Judge Johnson." Daniels blinked, his mouth hanging open. Harris looked as if the ground had shifted beneath him. Their laughter had died, leaving only disbelief. This is a joke," Daniels stammered. His voice cracked, sharp with panic disguised as bravado. "She can't be the judge." The bailiff's eyes darted nervously between them. He had known, of course, but even he seemed shaken by how the morning had unfolded. He repeated firmly, "All rise for Judge Amara Johnson." One by one. The people stood, reluctantly, uneasily, their gazes fixed on the woman they had just mocked. Slapped and dismissed, Daniels refused to stand. He scoffed, shaking his head. "She doesn't belong up there. Someone's messing with us." Harris leaned close, whispering loudly enough for the gallery to hear. "Figures. These days they'll give the robe to anyone, even—" He didn't finish the sentence, but the venom in his tone made his meaning clear. Gasps fluttered across the courtroom. Some shifted uncomfortably, others smirked, still unwilling to accept what they were seeing. Amara adjusted the robe draped across her shoulders. Her face remained unreadable, but her voice cut through the tension. "This court will have order." The words rang like iron, steady and sharp. She was no longer the woman collecting papers from the floor. She was the judge, commanding silence. Yet silence alone wasn't enough. She leaned forward slightly, her eyes locking on the officers. "Officer Daniels." "Officer Harris, do you deny striking and humiliating me moments ago in this courtroom?" Daniels' smirk faltered. That wasn't— You're taking this out of context." Context? Amara echoed, her voice low, dangerous. In a courtroom where justice is meant to prevail, you chose humiliation. You chose violence, murmurs rippled through the gallery. Lawyers exchanged glances. Jurors whispered to one another. For the first time, the authority of the officers cracked beneath the weight of her words. "You can't do this," Harris snapped. His face flushed red. "We're officers of the law." "And I," she said, lifting the gavel, "am the law in this room." The gavel struck once, the sound reverberating through the chamber like a hammer of fate. The shift was undeniable. Those who had laughed earlier now stared in shock, some even shrinking in their seats. A woman in the back row whispered, "She's the judge," as though repeating it would make the truth easier to believe. A young clerk near the wall straightened her spine, pride flickering in her eyes. She had watched the humiliation in silence, powerless to intervene. But now, justice breathed again. The atmosphere thickened, the air alive with suspense. Every second felt like a thread stretched to its breaking point. Daniels tried to recover his arrogance, leaning forward with narrowed eyes. "You're making a mistake." "Judge, nobody's going to take your word over ours." Amara's gaze didn't waver. "The people in this courtroom already saw what you did. Their eyes are witnesses. Their silence is testimony. You provoked us," Harris sputtered. "You came in here acting like you owned the place." Her lips curved into the faintest, coldest smile. "That's because I do." Gasps shot through the room again, sharp as the crack of a whip. She stood then, black robes falling like shadows around her. She didn't raise her voice, but the command in her tone made the entire room lean forward. "This courtroom is not your playground. It is not a stage for your arrogance. It is a temple of justice. And you, both of you, have defiled it." Daniel's fists clenched at his sides. His jaw worked furiously, but no words came. Harris opened his mouth, then shut it. His bravado dissolved into trembling silence. Amara raised the gavel again. "Today the accused are not the ones sitting in these benches. Today justice calls you forward." The entire room froze. The officers looked at each other, disbelief and fear warring across their faces. "You can't put us on trial," Daniel said at last, his voice shaking. Her reply was as steady as stone. "Watch me." The gavel struck again, sealing the reversal. The balance of power had flipped in a single breath. The officers who had humiliated her now stood under the shadow of judgment. The gallery leaned forward, whispering, hearts racing, knowing the spectacle had only begun. Judge Amara Johnson straightened in her chair, her eyes burning with the weight of years of silence, rejection, and perseverance. Her voice cut through the charged air. "Officer Daniels." "Officer Harris, step forward. This court will hear your defense." The sound of their footsteps echoed as they approached, no longer laughing, no longer mocking. For the first time, fear trailed behind them like a shadow, and the courtroom, once their arena of cruelty, was now her battlefield. The reckoning had begun. The silence inside the courtroom was unbearable. Every breath, every shifting shoe against the marble floor seemed too loud, too intrusive. All eyes were on her, Judge Amara Johnson, sitting high on the bench where, just an hour ago, no one believed she belonged. The gavel rested lightly in her hand, but the power it represented was heavier than stone. "Officer Daniels." "Officer Harris," she said, her voice steady, reverberating through the chamber. "You stand accused, not by me alone, but by your own actions, witnessed by every person in this room." The officers froze. Their uniforms, once symbols of control, now looked like ill-fitting costumes. "This is absurd," Daniels muttered, but even he no longer sounded convinced. Amara leaned forward. "Do you deny slapping me? Do you deny mocking me? Do you deny using this courtroom, the very place where justice should be sacred, as your stage for cruelty?" No answer, only silence. Finally, Harris stepped forward. His tone was defensive, desperate. "Your Honor, Judge Johnson, we didn't know who you were. We thought—" He paused, searching for words. "We thought you didn't belong here, that you were just—" "Wandering in." Amara's eyes narrowed. "So you assumed. And based on that assumption, you felt entitled to violence and humiliation?" The gallery murmured. A woman in the front row shook her head, disgust plain on her face. Daniels jumped in, voice sharp. We were maintaining order. People like her, he stopped himself, too late. The words hung in the air, venom exposed. People like me? Amara repeated, each word deliberate, her tone ice. Daniels swallowed. The silence after his slip was louder than any gavel strike. Her gaze drifted momentarily, not out of weakness, but memory. She saw herself at 12 years old, sitting on a cracked wooden chair in a cramped apartment. Her mother worked double shifts, scrubbing floors in buildings where people like Daniels never even saw the workers. She remembered the words a school counselor once told her. Girls like you don't become lawyers. You should aim lower. She remembered applying to law school, the rejections piling up, until one acceptance letter slipped through. She carried it like fire in her chest, and she remembered, most of all, standing outside this very courthouse years ago, watching other judges walk inside, vowing that one day she would stand among them. That day had come. The flash of memory hardened her resolve. Her voice regained its sharp edge. Officers, she said, your defense is ignorance. Your justification is assumption. But let us test that claim. She turned to the gallery. Did anyone here see me disrupt this courtroom before I was struck? A chorus of voices responded, no. Did anyone here see me act in a way that justified violence? Again, the answer was unanimous, no. She fixed her gaze back on Daniels and Harris. Then what you call maintaining order was nothing more than prejudice in uniform. The words cut like a blade. Daniels stepped closer, fists clenched. This is a setup. You're turning the whole room against us. Amara's voice didn't rise, but it carried authority that silenced even the whispers. No, Officer Daniels. You did that yourself. Harris shook his head, sweat beading at his temple. We didn't mean, we just thought what? She pressed. That a black woman couldn't possibly sit on this bench? That respect belongs only to those who look like you? Her voice cracked like a whip. The officers had no answer. The gallery shifted. Faces that had once smirked now glared at the officers. A man who had laughed earlier muttered, "This is shameful." Even the lawyers at their tables seemed unsettled, adjusting their ties. Looking anywhere but at the bench, the power had shifted entirely. Amara leaned back, letting the silence build, letting their shame burn under the weight of 100 eyes. You came here believing your uniforms made you untouchable, she said softly, yet every word was razor sharp. But today the law will show you otherwise. Daniels took a step forward, voice cracking. You're biased. You're the victim. You can't judge us, Amara's eyes flashed. Bias or justice? You stood here minutes ago believing yourselves judge, jury, and executioner over my dignity. Did you grant me neutrality then? The room went still again. You will answer for your actions, she declared. Not tomorrow. Not in some distant hearing, for a heartbeat, she thought again of her mother's voice. Never let them tell you where you don't belong. If they shut the door, climb through the window. Amara inhaled, steady. Her mother had never lived to see this moment, but she felt her spirit in the room, standing taller than any insult. She raised the gavel. Every eye followed, Officer Daniels, Officer Harris, for your conduct in this courtroom, for striking me, for humiliating me, for attempting to corrupt the sanctity of justice, I hereby find you in contempt. The words rang like thunder. You will be stripped of duty pending further investigation. Bailiff, escort them out. The bailiff, who earlier had hesitated, now stepped forward with confidence. His voice rang clear. Yes, Your Honor, the officer sputtered, protested, tried to argue. But the bailiff's hand was firm on their shoulders, guiding them toward the exit as the gallery erupted in stunned murmurs. As the doors closed behind them, silence returned. Every eye turned back to her. She didn't sit back immediately. Instead, she rose to her full height, robes flowing like shadows. Let today serve as a reminder, she said, her voice carrying the weight of years of silence and struggle. Justice does not bow to uniforms. It does not kneel to prejudice. It does not belong to those who laugh the loudest or strike the hardest. Justice belongs to truth. The words settled like scripture over the room. Some nodded, some wept quietly. All listened. Amara lifted the gavel one last time. Her hand didn't tremble. This court is adjourned. The strike echoed, final and absolute. She lingered only a moment before stepping down from the bench. The robe trailed behind her, the symbol of everything she had fought for and everything she had become. Outside the courtroom doors, cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. The world would soon know what had happened here. But inside her chest, there was only calm, because she knew this was never just about her. It was about every door slammed, every insult endured. Every person told you don't belong. Today, she had proven them wrong. And as she walked out beneath the courthouse steps, the sun breaking through gray clouds, Judge Amara Johnson carried not just a title, but a legacy born in humiliation, forged in defiance, sealed in justice.